From KVUE News in Austin, you're watching Texas This Week with Ashley Goodo.
Good Sunday morning. Another special session has come to an end, and Texas has a new Secretary of State. Let's get to the three things you need to know in Texas politics. Governor Greg Abbott appointed Fort Worth attorney John Scott as the new chief election officer for Texas, but the governor's pick for Secretary of State isn't without some backlash. Scott briefly represented former President Donald Trump in a lawsuit challenging the 2020 election results in Pennsylvania. Democrats say Scott is an architect of the, quote, big lie and question his ability to fairly oversee Texas elections. The Texas Senate is tasked with confirming the governor's appointment. But since Scott was named while the legislature is adjourned, that won't happen until they meet again in 2023. The University of Texas is raising some eyebrows after allowing Governor Greg Abbott to conduct an interview with the controversial conservative organization Breitbart on the 50-yard line of DKR Memorial Stadium. The interview covered Abbott's executive order banning vaccine mandates and criticism of President Joe Biden's policies. Among the critics, the Lincoln Project. The Political Action Committee pointed out the Longhorn Network pulled its ad, which was critical of Governor Abbott, from airing during a football game because it was political in nature, but allowed the interview to happen. The U.S. Supreme Court will take up Texas's near total ban on abortion next month. On Monday, the White House asked the High Court to block the law from being enforced after the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals froze a district judge's decision to temporarily block the law pending a hearing. On Friday, the justices said they will hear arguments in the case on November 1st, but declined to block enforcement of the law until then. The Texas Heartbeat Act bans doctors from performing abortions once fetal cardiac activity is detected, which generally happens at 6 weeks gestation, unless a mother's life is in danger. The law is not enforced through criminal penalty, but rather almost anyone from anywhere can sue a person who performs an abortion in Texas or helps a woman get an abortion in civil court. The third special session of the 87th Texas Legislature came to an end just before 1 o'clock Tuesday morning. Ross Ramsey, co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune, joined me to discuss the session. Lawmakers were able to pass legislation on 6 of the 10 items on the call, mostly conservative items. Talk to us about some overall thoughts about this past special session.
Well, I think, the main thing that they had to get done, they got done. That was draw maps for the House, the Senate, the congressional delegation, and the State Board of Education. And doing redistricting is really why they had to come back. It was delayed because of the census coming in late because of COVID. But while they were here, they got busy on some other stuff and completed some of the really most conservative legislation. Some of that they started earlier in the year, and some that they just kind of came up here at the last minute. In fact, one of the bills they passed, they didn't come up with until Monday morning, and by Monday night, it was a constitutional amendment on its way to voters. So whenever somebody tells you the legislature is slow, you got a counter example there.
Slow when they want to be slow. So we're going to dive into some of that. But let's talk about redistricting, the first thing that you mentioned. We're already seeing lawsuits filed against the map saying that they are not representative of Texas's growth. Talk to us about that.
Well, they're not representative of Texas's growth or of its politics, really. It's kind of interesting. The 95% of the growth in Texas, almost 4 million people moved to the state or were born here. The population increased that much over 10 years. 95% of the growth was people of color. About half of it was Hispanic. And Hispanic people in Texas now are about evenly matched in size, or in number rather, with Anglo people. So they're about the same number. And when you go to the maps are disproportionately, the districts on the maps, whether you're talking about the House, the Senate, the congressional district, or the State Board of Education, are disproportionately white majorities. There are very few districts with black majorities, and some maps there are 0 districts with black majorities. And certainly the number of Hispanic majority districts doesn't match the number of Hispanics in the population. On politics, if you look at the state and you use the 2020 election, Donald Trump got 52%. But the House, Senate, and congressional maps are all well above 55%, some of them above 60%. Republicans. So they're not only not representative of the people of the state, they're not representative of the politics of the people of the state.
I want to talk to you about the conservative nature of this past special session, as well as the other specials and the regular session. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick really sort of showed his muscle, if you will, about the things that he wanted to see on the agendas, which were added to the agenda, and passing the legislature. Talk to us about that.
Well, I think what you saw in this legislative session was what you saw coming if you were paying close attention to the 2020 election. Republicans in Texas had a really good election in 2020. They held the House, they held the Senate, in spite of Democrats' attempts to bring in a bunch of money and turn Texas blue was the slogan. They didn't pick up seats. The Republicans held their majorities. They hold all of the statewide positions. And they came in and they said, you know, look, the voters gave us a mandate and we're going to take it. And they passed extraordinarily conservative legislation all the way through. They passed permitless carry of guns. They passed the nation's strongest anti-abortion bill, that you can't have an abortion after 5 or 6 weeks of pregnancy. Just down the list, they did a lot of things like that. And I think it reflects their view of what the 2020 election meant and what their challengers in the 2022 elections are going to be. And it's pretty clear from the way they conducted themselves this year in the legislature that Republicans are not really afraid of Democrats as a political counterweight. What they're really afraid of is other Republicans. And they're making sure, in large measure, as a group, that they are the most conservative people running. And so when they get into a Republican primary, they'll be the ones those conservative voters will vote for. And they're not worried about what will happen in the general election because Democrats are so weak right now.
I think that is so clear when it comes to Governor Greg Abbott, who some people want to paint as a more moderate Republican. He put some legislation on the call. He has made statements recently to show that he is trying to prove, if you will, that he is conservative. And that's partially because he's running against at least two of the people who have announced that they're challenging him in the primary are very conservative Republicans.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the overwhelming forces in Republican politics right now is Donald Trump. And it's partly Donald Trump and the fact that he's out there talking about things. You know, he was talking about Texas needs election audits, and then we got election audits and some things like that. But there are also people in the party who kind of represent the Trump strain. And when you look at polling to see where Republican voters are, Trump's really popular with a large number of Republican voters. And when you see Greg Abbott sort of going in that direction, he's looking at the same polls everybody else is and seeing that his voters are kind of more in the Trumpian mode than they might have been when he was first elected to a statewide office in the mid-90s. And he's moved with the voters.
You know, when the special session, this third special session started, there were just 5 items on the call. We ended with 10. As you mentioned, even on Monday, there was another late add of items to the call. Right. What does that really say to you about the governor, his decision making, and the things that were added to the call?
Well, I think, you know, part of this is that they can add to the call anything that they want to. So you may say, if I'm a governor, I've got these 5 items I want first, but I've got 5 more items that if you get done with these, I'll come back in. There's also a little bit of horse trading here. If you guys will do this and this and this thing, then maybe I'll put this and this and this thing on the call, on the agenda for the session. So I think there was a little bit of both of those things. They were here for 90 days of special sessions. We had, in a year when you're supposed to have 140 days of legislature, we had 230. And in the last 90 days, those special sessions, the governor had full control of the agenda. And I think, kind of to your earlier point, that he wanted a conservative list of issues that they could present to voters in 2022, and that's what they got.
You can read more about the legislation lawmakers passed in the Texas Legislature section of KVUE.com. That's Texas This Week.